So I'm actually just going to go ahead and mute everyone. So now we're recording. People are still popping in. So let's start with where did it go? It's on I got it on a. So there was an article in the division newsletter, right? How many people actually read the articles besides? I mean, it kind of reminds me of the old Playboy magazine. People don't read the articles; they just go for the centerfold. So in the division newsletter, everybody's just reading the scandal sheet, the people that have had fines. Well, there's a lot of it. This is the division's way of talking to the agent population. So I'd encourage you to read the articles that they're posting because you'll learn a lot about what the division's thinking. So this one here is called the Great Inspection Addendum Disappearance Act, right? It's not an act as far as a law being passed. It's an act as in a third act twist, right? So you can read the article. It says, in reviewing licensees' transactions files, I've noticed a disturbing lack of an addendum, a disturbing lack of inspection addenda. I'm suspecting that a majority of the transactions have an inspection agreement between the buyers and sellers, but the agreement is being withheld from the lenders, title companies, brokers, office files. So if that is true, you're in violation of law, and you could be party to loan fraud, right? And the law portion carries fines as high as $5,000. So let's talk about this for a minute. We don't need to read through the whole article, but the gist of it is, so there's this notion, there's this water cooler education, if you will, that if you have an inspection repairs, it can be negotiated on a separate document because people. Let me back it up. So when you look up the word addendum in the dictionary, or the word addendum or addenda, right, for a plural, if you look it up on Wikipedia or the dictionary, basically what it's saying is in addition, right? It's in addition. It is not a it is not a state-approved form on the Division of Utah Real Estate Division's website. That's not the definition of an addendum. So people think that in order for it to be an addendum to the purchase contract, it has to be on the state-approved form. Well, that's false, right? Because that's not what an addendum is. An addendum is simply in addition to, added to, right, at the end or whatever, and it says that in the definitions. So if a buyer and seller agree to repair items on a napkin and they sign it, it's an addendum, right? It's an addendum. Now, so if the division's writing articles about this, obviously it's in a problem, and that means you're going to start looking for it. So when the division's writing articles, they're looking for it, right? When I say start looking for it, they may already be looking for it. So anyway, so there's an addendum in the MLS, and then we'll walk through that in a minute. But so if you have an agreement and then it's not turned into the lender, the title company, and the broker, well, you're in violation of law. You're in violation of law. And so and then I'll find up to $5,000. Now, the buyer and the seller, if they're withholding that from the lender, the buyer could be considered in loan fraud, right? They're committing loan fraud. And if you're helping the buyer, so if the two agents are orchestrating this, which is actually fraud, then you're a conspiracy to loan fraud. And so, so that, you could be in serious trouble with this. So, excuse me. So now, I get it. Nobody wants to send a document to the lender to kill the deal, right? So let's go on. Let's let's look at the form so let's look at the division's form. Actually, this is the UAR form, Utah Association of Realtors. So resolution of due diligence addendum number blank, and you put the number in there. So there's 3 sections to this. Number 1, 2, and 3, right? So seller and buyer agree to as follows: closing costs. Number 2 is purchase price, or number 3, repairs. So the simplest item is, if you're going to have an agreement, if you don't already have closing costs built into your transaction, which a lot of times in this market you don't. So if you have repairs, then let's do it let's just go after a closing cost, right? Just put an addendum together and says seller to pay. You can use this one here, or you can use, what do you call it? You could just use an addendum that says seller agrees to pay X amount of closing costs. You can use there's an addendum in the MLS that is specifically for closing costs. You can just simply use that. Then there's purchase price reduction. So this is typically more of, so if you got a buyer, a buyer that's paying their own closing costs, obviously number 1 would be the best. If it's a cash buyer, then they don't have any loan closing costs, then the reduction in the purchase price would make more sense. Because reducing somebody's purchase price $2,000-$3,000 might only net the buyer maybe $15-$16 a month, and that's not going to take care of the repairs. So if the buyer's paying their own closing costs, say $4,000 or $5,000, and they can get $2,000 of credit, well, that's cash in the buyer's pocket. So which they can in turn make the repairs with. So the purchase price is different. That's kind of reserved a little more for a cash buyer. Now number 3, let's pay real close attention to number 3. So what it says here, repairs. If you want the repairs to be made, seller and buyer agrees that seller will be responsible for completion of the repairs by the settlement deadline, not by the due diligence, right there. They have to agree to this by the due diligence deadline, but the repairs have to be made by the settlement, unless otherwise agreed to in writing. Seller shall, through contractors, right, that's a key word there, complete all repairs to comply with applicable law, including governmental permit, inspection, and approval requirements. So if you're the listing agent and this comes across and you got a list of repairs, you've just agreed that your seller is going to hire contractors, pull permits, and have inspections. Okay, that's a lot. So, I mean, that you're putting your seller in a tough position, because you see it says otherwise, unless otherwise agreed in writing. So you'd have to have another addendum to say how it's going to be done if it's not going to be done this way. Now, if you're giving these to the lender's going to know we want it done right. So this addendum here is really saying, out of these 3 options, you're better off with 1 and 2 than 3. But if you want to do repairs, and you can use a line item addendum, this is not a state mandatory form. But what is mandatory is that you disclose to the lender if there's anything going on, right? Now, I don't suggest you negotiate all the repairs back and forth with an addenda, right? I suggest that you do that by phone calls and emails, and then when you come to a meeting of the minds, write it up. Somebody said nobody can see the screen. Oh, man. I get people jumping in and out all the time. Okay. All right, so now you can see the screen. I apologize for that. So, I mean, it's just an addendum. I was reading a newsletter and reading an addendum. So, here's the addendum. So as we talked about, this addendum is really designed to kind of push you to 1 and 2. But as we were talking about number 3, so repairs to be made by seller, so through contract unless otherwise agreed to. And then if you scroll down, buyer's remedies unfinished repairs. Let's say the seller doesn't finish the repairs by settlement deadline, right? So if, as of settlement deadline, the repairs have not been completed, the buyer may enter into a escrow agreement with seller approved by lender. So most lenders will not allow escrow unless it's weather related. let's say there's a couple shingles had to be replaced on the roof, and there's a foot of snow on the roof, well, then the lender's good with that. But if it's just because it didn't get done, no, the lender's going to say, no, we want the work done. Now, is it possible for lenders to do escrow? Absolutely. But my experience is they don't, unless it's weather related, right? So they can agree in escrow. In the event seller and buyer cannot agree in escrow, or it is not approved by the lender, if applicable, the buyer may alternately elect one of the following remedies, 3.1A or 3.1B below, right? So if the work is done and escrow is not allowed, buyer may cancel the REPSI, and in addition to the return of the earnest money deposit or deposits, if applicable, accept the seller's liquidated damage. So they can get double earnest money. They get their earnest money back. The seller's in default. The seller owes them an amount equal to the earnest money. And then that's considered liquidated damages, meaning you can no longer sue the buyer. Or you can select B. B, buyer may complete the purchase of the property, then pursue other remedies available at law. So what that's saying is if you check that box, you complete it, that means you're just going to accept the contract and then go sue the seller. That's what 3B says. Or 4, due diligence condition. Upon acceptance of this addendum, buyer's objection to the due diligence shall be deemed resolved as follows, right? Or condition is waived, right? Buyer's due diligence condition is not waived. If you check that box, it's not waived. So you'd want to check that box, not waived, and then you want to, I would want to do, it depends. I mean, it depends on what the repairs are. I mean, a lot of times what happens is people get emotional in these transactions, and the agent gets emotional as well, and they're fighting over $500. It's like, look, you just have a conversation with your buyer. Hey, look, buyer, it's $500. Do you want to cancel the contract and not move? Or do you just want to say, okay, yeah, I'm right, the seller's wrong. You have the option to go to court, but that's going to cost you more than $500. I'll tell you what, let's do this. I'll give you a $500 gift at closing or after closing. Just close, right? Don't get hung up on little amounts of money. If it's significant, then you could possibly sue the seller. If there's a lot of work to be done, if they agreed to replace the roof or something like that. But you got to make sure in advance that the seller has assets to attach to. In other words, because if they don't have any assets, well, then, what good is going to court, right? So any thoughts, questions, or concerns on this? Let me unmute everybody. So be careful. So be cognizant, because I'm going to unmute everybody, and then let's see. Unmute. So everybody's unmuted. If you have questions, let's go for it. Any thoughts, questions, concerns, hallucinations? So I'd appreciate if you stop your side comment or side conversations. We can actually hear them. So if no questions, I'm going to go ahead and mute it back. So I got the chat window open in case you want to chat. So let me see. Let's move this. So, okay. If nobody's got any thoughts, questions, concerns, hallucinations, I either did a very great job or somehow you managed to look at Facebook and you squirreled away on me. So again, I want to bring this to your attention. You can do the adjustments, on a line item addendum, where you're no longer binding, but you got to get specific on how you want repairs done. Don't just say fix item, because now that's up to the seller's discretion. I want to be real specific, but usually I take the money. One of our agents we were talking to last week, and I went through it with her, and I explained the best thing to do is get closing costs, and then, get, X amount of dollars in closing costs, and then fix it after closing. Because remember, the seller's objective is to do this as cheap as possible, and the buyer's objective is they want the quality of the Taj Mahal. Well, those two don't work together. So that's why. So somebody just you answer. So that's why it's better to go after closing costs or a price reduction, either one. So anyway, does anybody have any questions? They want to pop in, send a chat message or unmute yourself and then ask. If not, I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting. It was a short one today. It's just a simple topic. But again, let me reiterate that if the division's writing articles about it, because remember what she said in the beginning of the article, right? So this is by Laurel North. She said, in reviewing licensees' transaction files. So what does that tell you? So that means the division is looking at files. I've noticed a disturbing lack of an inspection addenda. So that means the division's looking at files, and they're not seeing inspection addenda. Now, they're not saying that these files were in violation. She just noticed that there weren't any. So she'd have to actually prove that there was a side agreement. Now, that, you know, so see, Deb, unmute. All right. So you're unmuted, Deb. I think you were. No, let's see. Participant list. Let me hide this. Where's the participant list? So so Debbie is unmuted. Go ahead, Deb. Now you can talk. Hello? So did you want it to be unmuted, Deb? Okay. Well, I've unmuted you, so if you want to talk, go for it. So again, so I take this as a shot across the bow that they're looking at files and they're going to be coming after somebody. Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. So what you're saying is to use the resolution of due diligence addendum, or are you saying that it's better to use a line item addendum? It seems to me that the resolution of due diligence addendum would be better to use simply because the language is already there and you don't have to worry about it. Am I right or no?
Yes and no. I mean, the language is specific, but I think if you're asking for closing costs, my opinion, you're better off using the closing costs addendum.
So then you're not explaining why you need closing costs, just the fact that you need closing costs.
Right, because this is not a state-approved form that's mandatory to use.
Right.
What she's saying is if your realtor used the UA, she's telling you to use it, but I don't see any law in there, and I don't see any problem. I mean, the lender could say, yeah, but that, why are you doing that? It's an inspection. Now, if there's a serious red flag, if you ask for, all of a sudden in the middle of the contract, you ask for $6,000-7,000, that's going to raise a flag.
I was going to say, wouldn't you have to inform the lender of why you're doing that? They're going to ask, right?
Yeah, if the lender asks, yeah, you can't lie. So, in my opinion, that unless the lender, if you just send over an addendum, if you don't try and negotiate, and you just send over an addendum, closing costs, I think you're good.
Okay. Would you have to say this? Would you have to indicate that the due diligence portion is waived at that point too on a line item?
Well, you could, but the due diligence has its natural deadline that it goes away.
Well, that's true. You're right there. Okay.
So, I mean, I'm okay with the addendum, but if you use the due diligence resolution addendum, it's clear to the lender what happened, and that's the purpose. That's the purpose of it. I mean, in other words, the safest thing to do is use the resolution of due diligence.
Okay.
That's the safest, because then nobody can come back and say. But where it gets really dicey, if the buyer and the seller are negotiating through this, and then the buyer and the seller just say, okay, rather than do repairs, let's just do an addendum. But if the buyer did an inspection and just said, hey, we found X, Y, Z, and then they just send over an addendum, I'm okay with that because it
Okay.
wasn't negotiated between the buyer and the seller to correct repairs. Just to buy, because no house is perfect. Any buyer can inspect a home and just say, "Hey, yeah, we'll buy it, but we want $1,000, back."
So it would be better still if you're negotiating back and forth to do the negotiating and then just put it in one addendum. Am I right?
Correct. Oh yeah, never.
Okay.
Yeah, don't go back and forth with 10 addenda to negotiate. That you should always negotiate on the phone and via email. When you come to a meeting of the mind, then you disclose to everybody what you've agreed to.
Then you memorialize it in the addendum. Okay, I got you.
Correct. Because there's some things that aren't safety factors. You got this and that, handle on a dishwasher, something like that. Things like that. I mean, that doesn't need to be like back and forth on addendum. You can work through those. And just know in this market, in the seller's market, I mean, you can have your offer, if you're asking for closing costs, and in this market, especially if you're under 350,000, I was looking this morning, there was only 80 something single family homes in Salt Lake County, 350 and under, 80 something. I forget the exact number, and that's probably changed by now if somebody changed one of their statuses. So, there's not a lot of negotiation room for the buyer. So what I would do is potentially talk to the listing agent and talk to your buyer and say, look, we're going to do an inspection. If it's more than this repair amount, we can either cancel or renegotiate the price, but just ask for closing costs up front or something to that effect. But I mean, because the sellers don't have to do any repairs in this market. Now, some sellers will if it's a safety issue. So, but anyway, but you got the division's newsletter. This is straight from the division's mouth. They want you to use this addendum. Like I said, it's not required because it's not a state approved form.
Can I just say one thing here too?
Yep.
I was one of those people that just read the scandal sheet for like ever. And never did anything else. And I started reading it over the last couple of months, and there is some excellent material in there.
Oh, yeah.
I really, everybody should be reading this when it comes out because it answers your questions and gives you good ideas on how to really be safe in your business and how to do things the proper way so that you don't get hauled into the division for doing something wrong. And I think especially newer agents need to read this and just devour it all the time because there is so much knowledge in there that can really help you. So that's my 2 cents.
Yep.
Read it.
I agree. Just read it. I mean, you don't have to sit down and read it one sitting. Read one article a day. I mean, it comes out every 3 months, so it's not like, you're going to be behind. And they're online. You can go back and read old ones. And and what it tells you is, again, this is like, if you want to know what the division's thinking, you want to know what the division's going after, read the newsletter.
Exactly.
Anyway, okay. So anybody else got any thoughts, questions, concerns, hallucinations?
No. Thank you, Rob.
Yep. I'm going to stop the recording and end the meeting. Thanks for joining us, boys and girls. Have an amazing day.